I think I'll start with the Phillies just really quickly because I don't have a whole lot to say other than this is kind of what I was afraid of in the offseason. And listen, I think everybody knows at this point that there are times where I'm happy to toot my own horn, toot toot. And I was happy to buy in early in the season through the first two series that the Phillies looked really good. And I still questioned whether or not they made a smart enough move in the outfield, and that I wasn't exactly a big believer in Johan Rojas, that Brandon Marsh is a limited player, and that Max Kepler wasn't going to be the difference maker they need at the plate. Remember, I said through the end of last season, so when this show started, I think in July or August of last year, that you need to add a bat that's going to help to make this kind of a slump-proof group. You need somebody who's going to consistently be able to get on base. I don't care if they're a thumper. I don't care if they're going to rack up 25, 30 home runs. You just need somebody who can consistently get on base to take some of the pressure off of these other guys so they're not getting in their own heads and they're not constantly swinging for the fences every time, right? So I talked about this all second half of last year. And then when the Phillies didn't show the killer instinct, couldn't put the Braves out of their misery, couldn't put the Mets out of their misery, and then they ended up matching up against the Mets in the postseason, I said, once again, very concerned that the bats are going to go cold here. Very concerned they don't have somebody who makes them a slump-proof team. And so there we were again, friends. And then you got to the offseason. And while I didn't really think that they were going to sign Juan Soto, I thought that they were going to at least make it look like they were more involved. And I thought that there'd be a chance that maybe the Phillies would go out and they would try to do something of value, that the Phillies would try to make you at least believe, even at the smallest percentage, that they were going to try to add somebody who could sort of have an impact. But they didn't do that. Their big signing, which I can't even imagine they would call their big signing, was Max Kepler, who's a good player, who's a nice player, but he's not a difference maker. And he's certainly not a guy that's going to help you avoid a slump. And he's certainly not a guy that you're going to want to rely on in high leverage situations. If you asked me who are the five guys that you'd want to see get up to the plate in the ninth inning with a staring down a 1 or 2 run deficit, Max Kepler's not on that list. So that to me was a bit of a problem, right? That was an issue. And they didn't go out and they didn't fortify the bench. And so what they did once again was they ran it back in a sense where they were hoping that Brandon Marsh was going to become a player that he just isn't. They were going to hope that, well, if Brandon Marsh doesn't become a player that we hope he could eventually be, well, at least we have Johan Rojas. And Johan's going to take a step. Well, he hasn't. So the outfield as it stands right now is a total mess. And it's a legitimate issue. Now, the bullpen is a mess. There's no getting around the fact that the bullpen is a disaster right now. There's no getting around the fact that this bullpen is going to need to be added to between now and the trade deadline if this team is to have any chance of remaining in contention for, let's say, the NL East. I think the wild card, they're going to be in contention the entire season. But this NL East division is a little bit open, right? I think that there is a possibility that you could get on a hot streak and maybe put yourself in position where you're a little bit more in it than you expected to be. Because if you take a look at the standings and if you go back to what we expected at the beginning of the season, we thought that the Braves would very much be in it. The Profar PED suspension has effectively hurt them in a lot of ways. So the Braves are down at the bottom of the division at 4-11. We didn't expect anything in the Nationals. We didn't expect anything out of the Marlins. So it was you were going to hopefully vie for the NL East title with the Braves and the Mets. The Mets are up on the Phillies by a game. So you're right there. You're still in striking distance. And even with the holes in the bullpen and even with a legitimate outfield concern where I could make the case that Castellanos gets frustrating, but he's still a major league hitter, I could make a case right now that 2 of your outfield spots should be replaced almost immediately. And that's a problem, especially if you're trying to compete for a World Series. I mean, it's great if you think all right, we're getting good enough productivity at the plate from at least some of our infielders, but the outfielders are the issue. And I'm going to try not to include Alec Boehm in the positivity of the infield because he's not part of the positive. Then you got a guy like Edmundo Sosa who can kind of play anywhere, and he's been a revelation this season. But again, there could be a law of diminishing returns, so you have to be really, really careful with Sosa. All of this is to say This team, for whatever reason, chose to run it back, largely run it back. Now, Stubbs got sent to the minors. So maybe you say, all right, it's not just the all vibes team this year. That's not an impact move. I look back at the guy that I've called Temu.com's Mr. Rogers, Dave Dombrowski, a guy who, for whatever reason, seemed to believe in this team, despite the fact that they've come up short multiple years in a row, despite the fact that adding to this team presumably could put it in position to be at or near the top of the National League, not just the NL East. And he decided to run it back. Now, I've talked to a few people, media people, who've said, well, the Phillies' mindset was don't lock into a bad contract or a long-term contract at a high salary per year. Don't lock that guy in this offseason. Wait till next year. There'll be some money coming off the books. And then next year's free agent class could be stronger. Or don't get yourself locked into a bad deal because you'll have some flexibility when you get towards the trade deadline. Or if, God forbid, you need it sooner, you'll have some flexibility this season. I haven't seen it yet. The Phillies aren't exactly like in the rumors right now with like 3 or 4 high-profile targets. Now, I don't need to know through the media that a team is actively pursuing that impact player. And in fairness, a lot of times, if a trade is made now, the word doesn't get out. It just kind of happens. You get closer to the deadline, and then the names start flying. But this Phillies team desperately needs another hitter in a big, big way. And it just feels like Dombrowski misevaluated this season and this roster, and he got himself kind of stuck in a quagmire because now it's too late in some ways for them to rectify this because there are a lot of teams, obviously, that are going to believe that they could potentially be playoff contenders or that they have a chance. So now you're not going to have a team that's going to want to trade an impact outfielder, corner outfielder. Can you find a center fielder that's an upgrade on the market? I don't know who's going to be willing to make that deal right now. And the cost is possibly going to be even higher than it would have been at the trade deadline last year because now everybody knows, all right, the Phillies are where they are. They see an opportunity. They see a potential to do something in the NL East. Why am I going to send them an impact player and not get an impact return? That's where they're at. And I think the Phillies really did misevaluate this. Chris Fried says Dave is stuck with the sins, terrible drafts, player development from the previous GM regime. And there might be some truth to that, but what's the thing that we said about Dave Dombrowski when he got hired here? Dombrowski had a history of being a guy who guts the farm system, makes deals, signs guys, and ultimately pushes you over the hump to win a World Series. Now, in fairness, a lot of times when he leaves a club, their farm system is left in tatters, but you kind of are willing to trade off because you won a World Series. Now, maybe he's taking a more conservative approach, or maybe John Middleton or somebody within ownership is saying, hold on, sport, give it a second. We can't end up in that situation again. We've already put out copious amounts of cash for the likes of Schwarber, Castellanos, Real Muto, and Harper as well. And in the case of Real Muto, they've also dealt away prospects. So, maybe somebody at a higher level said, you're not able to just burn the whole thing down. No, you're not allowed to trade Andrew Painter unless you're getting a bona fide multi-time all-star stud back. I don't know. But to me, it is a concern that all of a sudden, Dave Dombrowski apparently seems to be macro view guy. And now he cares about the farm system where making an impact move last year maybe helps you get to a World Series. Making an impact move this past offseason maybe helps you get off to an even stronger start, get out to a running lead in the NL East. Maybe you never look back this year. Hard to say, still early. They've only played 15 games. I'm not about to light myself on fire and stand outside of Citizens Bank Park, but there are concerns. I think it's okay to be concerned.